Yo, how are you doing, folks? Welcome to episode 90. We've hit the big 90, getting ever closer to 100. We've booked in some very interesting guests moving forward. I'm actually just going to announce one flat out now because I am so proud to have it done. We've just booked Dennis McKenna for the first episode in September, which is episode like 97, 6, something like that. My math is terrible when I'm this high and happy. But yeah, we've got some very, very interesting people in the pipeline. I don't know who we're going to have for episode 100. Actually, drop us some suggestions in the comments below. I do want to make it, kind of a milestone episode, as it is our first century. Many more to come, I know. But still, the first is the first, and I want to mark it appropriately. So anyway, folks, as we move towards this century of episodes, I wanted to sort of catch you up on a few different subjects. So we've got a few specials coming as well, which is multiple guests, kind of catching up on subjects, not just kind of who the personalities are and the people themselves, but what is going on within sort of aspects of the industry, what is going on with, regulations, with framework, with legality. Because you know me, guys, I'm a bit fastidious and I like to know everything. And to be honest, I've spent about 8 months ignoring CBD because it's such a clusterfuck. So today is effectively the CBD special, and we have two wonderful guests for you today who are previous Simpa Life guests. They are, I was going to say, I'm going to identify as numbers now. You're all losing your names, folks. If you come on the program now, you're just numbers. They are guest 80 and 75. My notes are terrible at it. And they are the chair of the Scottish Hemp Association and founder of Holistic Highland Hemp and the founder of the Hound agency. They are Cefyn Jones and Kyle Esplin, respectively. How are you doing, gentlemen?
I'm all good, sir. And yourself?
I'm pretty good. How are you keeping, Kyle?
Been great, Simpa. Good to be here.
Excellent. Well, we're obviously trying to put this together for a little while. Obviously, it's an ever-evolving situation, and there's only so much we could cover in the next sort of hour or two as we go forward. So I think I just kind of want to start at the beginning because, like I said, I've checked out of this for most of this year because everything else has been moving in different sectors and different quarters. So I suppose the first question to you both is, well, what the fuck is happening with CBD in the UK? Where are we? What's happening?
Oh, Kyle, do you want to go first?
Oh, you could go for it. On you go.
Oh, all right there, basically. So we as an industry have been put through an entire process that is, shall we say, beard scratching worthy. And that's because there's been lots of kind of contradictions, whether that's, have you had a product on the shelves at a certain time, or, whether we are or we're not following the 1 milligram rule or whatever is going on. So in a nutshell, I've felt the need to do an investigation on all of the current companies that have been validated. Now, just to kind of clear this up, right? Validated companies are companies that have completed their applications and that the FSA have accepted that they have a product with an application going on. Whereas the vast majority of the industry right now with applications, they are basically in a stage otherwise known as awaiting evidence. Now, it's the validated companies that are interesting because, from my understanding, a fair few of them certainly didn't have products on sale that the whole industry needed to have products on sale. And there are a couple who, shall we say, technically more drug than food. And then, of course, we do have the synthetic cannabinoid issue, which is really questionable. Now, one of the big issues to know about novel foods is that we're working off guidelines that are based around isolate, specifically CBD isolate of pharmaceutical grade. Now, that is being used to determine the requirements for all of the products, whether they're full spectrum, broad spectrum, synthetic. Now, that then lies the problem. So we have products on there that are gauged by different guidelines versus products on there that shouldn't even be there. It's a bit confusing. I think that's a fair assumption, isn't it, Kyle?
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. And where we are is exactly where I expected things would be. This is exactly like if you said to me a few years ago, when this started 3 years ago, whatever, do you think after all this process and all this time, we would be in this state of confusion and all this? I would say, yes, that is exactly what I expect of this process to be. So for everyone who's like, disappointed, frustrated, find it ongoing. It's like, well, they're always like, buy the ticket, take the ride, as they say, you know, that's what was being offered at the start of the process. And for some reason, people said, oh, wow, this is the solution that the CBD industry is needing. This is what it needs to clear the air from all the bad press of the cowboys and the THC that's in the products. And now we're going through with the system with as high levels of THC as there has been generally in products. And now food standards are saying that they're not looking at the THC levels. They're only interested in the safety of the toxicity side of it, which is an interesting take for food standards to say about the trace amounts of other cannabinoids, the milligram content. After all the press it got, you know, the press was thrown in with this confusion of this process is going to sort all the bad press about trace THC. There was no headline saying, wow, this is what we need. We're going to test out CBD on rats' livers and see how toxic and see if it's safe for consumption. Yeah, this is what we're needing. Like that wasn't the way it was pitched. There was just general confusion. And a lot of people in the picture were like, oh, great, there's a process. This will be the solution. So yeah, there's a process. Great, get on board. So let's see where it goes, you know. But here we are with no sign of any clarity on the horizon. I mean, my concerns really for all the folks who are investing in things in this process where it is, and like in Europe, being asked now with human trials, and I think Europe's now separated the way they're looking at synthetic and natural, which they weren't before. That's under EFSA. I don't think FSA hasn't stated that. I think that was on the recent update with the human trials. But like, I feel that by the time we get through this for companies, after all this work to prove some small amount of cannabinoids in what is a food product, countries are going to move on to legal cannabis market access. And there's a lot of companies out there who are pushing for that to happen. And I think some of the companies who they're not just viewing it in, let's say, the traditional sense of the higher THC market and the higher market share of cannabis consumers as they perceive that range to be, but also possibly dragging the sort of what we've known to be full spectrum hemp extracts, putting them into the new cannabis space to get around the whole food product thing and just, you know, this is what's going on just now, and that could be some other way to tackle it. So for the companies who are all in this with all these questions, and then there's the other ones who have the full spectrum products on the list, and so I know of some companies who are on the list with full spectrum who don't think they're going to be successful. They think at some point they're going to be removed, even though it says they're going forward just now. You know, they don't know, is this over the 1 milligram rule or whatever else will come up about that. But same as my conversations with Food Standards Scotland up here, it doesn't seem clear for full spectrum extracts from the way it's being discussed. Like, you know, if half a milligram of CBG needs to be proven safe for toxicity next, and all the other trace amounts, I don't know. So it's all kind of expected to be, and it's really, really slowed down the industry. I mean, the lockdown was bad enough for the little companies and things, with all the, especially like shopping centres as well, were knocked on, foot traffic for some of those, let's say, on the ground distribution chains that were outside of the big high street names. And it's really slowed things down, I think, for the industry. And it's also made it awkward of just the uncertainty, the way it's just continuing as it was, the way folks have invested a lot of money for something different. It's not even clear what that different is, if it's going to be successful. So it's...
Yeah. And if I could just add to you there, Kyle, you're spot on, mate. But I think that it comes down to what's actually recognised as a food crime, and that is compromising the validity of a foodstuff. Now, if you think about it, 16 lab reports for pharmaceutical grade isolate does not represent full spectrum, broad spectrum, synthetic at all. But then that's still being used to carry those products through, right? That's compromising the validity. But there's also two different food crimes known as misrepresentation and substitution, right? And misrepresentation is exactly as it sounds. You know, if you say something is this, it has to be this. So you are having issues there with the likes of synthetic products that don't need to be labeled as being synthetic. Substitution, well, that's an area where you're putting requirements on a food, or you're creating a food and you're not kind of labeling it appropriately. If you kind of get where I'm going.
You say that something is banana if it's banana flavored. You know what I mean? There was a big thing around flavored, the language of marketing of food stuff. So yeah.
So basically, on the nutshell, on the basis of that, the Food Standards Agency are endorsing food crimes that are effectively clamping down the ability for the CBD industry to grow.
Yeah, I think that is quite fair. Before we sort of move on with anything, there's an interesting analogy that came to mind. Maybe it's got something to do with the sheer amount of fucking hours I've done on the road recently. But imagine we're in a 4-lane highway and we're driving A to B. A is where the fuck we are. B is where we want to be in terms of full decriminalization, deschedulization, legalization, whatever the ultimate pinnacle is. And there's traffic and we're weaving between lanes, or at least a lot of people are. And so they say, CBD, move in. All right, let's bank all our stuff into CBD, knowing that they want to get to THC in the full market. And then that slows down with regulations. They go, change the language. All right, move lanes. All right, we're hemp now. Hemp, go. So we're fighting for hemp and they're driving. Traffic again slowed down. All right, switch. Medical's now on board. Go to medical. Now we're medical. And so it feels to me that this divisional attitude amongst it's these venture capitalists. That was a bad slip. Venture capitalists they're not interested in they don't want to get there. They want to be the ones that when whoever gets there, they make that money back from. So they don't care about who gets crashed, whatever. They're not caring about the road itself and the journey and all the rest of it. They only want to make sure they're getting their bank in between. So they're the ones that are flashing and letting you into that other lane rather than you going, no, let's stay over it and keep going. Do you know what I mean? There could be a collective, it's an analogy starting to break down, but a collective effort to get through that traffic. Say it's like, again, motorways, because I've been driving a lot of motorways on a night. They go from 3 lanes to 1 and you get that merge. And some nights you'll end up there for half a fucking hour because no one will let the other car in. But if everyone let every other one in, within a few minutes, everyone would flow and you'd be fucking through it. And that's kind of where we are now with this cannabis reform. And I think a lot of people from CBD that went to hemp that are now medical, that have gone medical to hemp, and they're just trying to get through that traffic. And now starting to get so frustrated and detached from it that there is now space again for that collective conversation to go, wait, where are we all trying to get? Let's work together. Do you know what I mean? Because they've tied us in knots. They're now trucking cones in the middle of lanes that we didn't expect. There's cars breaking down in front of us. And these obstacles can't be surmounted individually. And it has to be, in my opinion, sort of collectively, because otherwise they're going to own that CBD lane and they'll never let you in. It'll be all Mercedes and BMW drivers. And they'll be, they're not letting no one in, and they're getting that fast lane and they're going. And you'll be stuck there watching them in your hemp lane, in your medical lane, in your whatever. Whereas if we all cannabis, again, that's where the analogy breaks down, we get there faster, you know?
No, I agree with you on that, mate. You know, at the end of the day, cannabis is a food before medicine in my eyes. And, you know, the more we do kind of get trapped by this this recreational versus medicinal angle, we are detracting from the point and becoming splintered left, right, and centre.
Even food is a use, not a moniker. It's not a name. Cannabis is first and foremost is a plant. It grows as a plant. Then through action, it becomes other things. It can become a battery. It can become a drug. It can become a medicine. It can become, do you know what I mean? A weapon, theoretically. It could be, do you know? So I think that's where I'm trying to go with my kind of argument moving forward is we need to win the plant back. Because if we have the right to the plant, you can fill your house with it and do whatever and no problem. But then if you want to sell it onto an open market, then there'll be regulations, rules and laws and hygiene standards, etc. But if you then want to like give something to your mate in the same way you give tomatoes out your greenhouse, do you know what I mean? Yeah, then if you want to make a ketchup company, it's going to cost you some investment. You've got to go through all the loopholes and do it correctly. And I think that's where we need to almost get to is the majority of people that are really well-intentioned that run brands, companies, agencies, organizations that are cannabis, that I think that's what they need to almost get back to. We got distracted. We were all getting frustrated and we just want to get ahead. And we're thinking 2 cars, that's enough. I'll fucking cut in front of this guy, and burn a bridge and not be able to get back into that lane. And that's kind of where we are at the minute. We're all just enraged by this need to get there, in my opinion. So yeah, I agree. It should be a food first. Then if you choose drug second, because if you use it as a food, you don't then need it as a medicine or therapeutic, prophylactic, etc., because it already is. But then if you want to choose to use it as a euphoriant, an intoxicant, then that's your free will to do so. In the same way, if you wanted to build a bed out of crates and then sleep on carling every night, it's your prerogative. There is no misuse of the drug there. Doing shotguns out of cans is not a misuse. So all of these things where they're talking us into very narrow pathways of going, you're allowed it, but you have to see this person once a month. You have to pay them this. You're only allowed to vaporize it. You're only allowed to use this vaporization product. You're only allowed to do it at this time of day, this place, this. Like, that's not the right avenues for me. Like, again, I believe the ultimate end of this, if the war wins, CBD is an industry is ubiquitous, because then the people that are in CBD want to fucking be in CBD. They're not trying to shortcut to get hemp licenses or shortcut to run a club or a dispensary or whatever. They're actually people that love and have a passion for this one molecule, this one part of cannabis, and they should belong in that lane in the same way the people that want to grow the low cultivars, the people that want to be bud tenders. There are vendors in this country that can identify a cultivar from a smell across the room. You can't train that, you can't teach that, you can't buy that, but that skill set should belong where the marketplace is. And like I said, I think the more we can do to unmuddy the waters, the better we go. So with this whole CBD thing, then what's the general consensus of the people? Because I agree, I've seen so many shut shops when I've traveled around the UK for this Product Earth tour, so many CBD businesses that have gone under, so many wholesalers even as well that have just shut doors. So like, what's the consensus that you guys are hearing from your different sort of socials and your networks?
I was going to say my view on what happened with all that was it ties in with some of the developments in the States. I think it's quite interesting. Like, I feel it was where CBD isolate turned up on the market, which was a few years after whole plant extracts started it off. And the middlemen, salesmen thought this was the key to everlasting cannabis supplement sales figure growth. And this would be snapped up by High Street and everywhere. And everyone went all in on isolate to the point where the market crashed, a year or two ago with isolate. And there was a lot of companies, it was, from a year or two ago when all this started, who had isolate in stock, which was worth a lot less than they paid for it, a few months earlier. And they were either going to have to work very hard to get it back through the markup in products, or that's when it came on the market, they could chemically convert it into Delta 8 THC, Delta 10 THC, and other variations through a chemical process and say, oh, well, this came from hemp. The only reason that happened was this big push for CBD isolate, which went and crashed the value of the CBD milligram in products, which started out as whole plant hemp extracts. And the quality plant extracts have not like they're not available for the significantly plummeted price in proportion compared to like what happened with isolate over the last few years, So it's really, that's really disbalanced and changed people's perception of the market, because from I came to this in 2013, but it was end of 2012 when I heard about it first, comes from Colorado and Charlotte's Web and all this, and that was proper whole plant extracts, not from European hemp, with superior terpene profiles, I'd imagine, from the initial variety lines that were extracted. Then it moved to whole plant hemp from European, still getting some good beta-caryophyllene and pinene and some other terpenes in there, not with some of the sweet optimized range of the other CBD varieties that are not in the European catalogue, but that was fine. And then CBD isolate and the market price, just dropped significantly, and that completely just altered everyone's experience and perception of CBD. The same as like the people who came to it through only fine if you want to have CBD in your gummies, whatever, that's fine. But if you've come to it through the perception that this was like the stuff you heard about from Colorado, you need a little bit, it has to be explained, and that's not on the product or at the high street sales outlet. So that's just, I feel, sort of muddied the waters in the perception of sort of where the hemp market was, where the CBD thing came. The example from the States of all the new compounds with the synthetic conversions or whatever, and getting around regulation, and nobody even knows what's the consumption of them. Like, I mean, we just wouldn't be in that position if everything, as you say, it's always trying to find some other, what's the next, it is, I mean, that's the way the folks invest in, what's the next opportunity of where something moving next. But I think it ties in what you were saying, Simpa, or let's say your what you're not digging about some of the way that's going, I would compare to the nice unfolding in Thailand that we've had, is well worthy of a mention. And along the lines of, as I said, the Thai health minister was involved in changing and telling the people that the stigma is over, use this for your health, use it in a positive way, be smart about it, etc. But the fact that he was involved in giving that message, not the Thai health minister saying that, all right, now we're going to do lots of clinical trials and wait to see if it works for this condition. No, the health minister was saying the stigma is over, use it for your health. And considering, just a couple of years before, or a year before, people were still being sentenced to death and that for cannabis plants in Thailand, that's just such a radical change, and also inspiring for the world how it hasn't been done through the commercial lens of, this has to be sold to you by companies who are going to do all this testing and this is how it's got to go. But this deliberate way of they're introducing it into society as a plant, I believe it's like a year before larger commercialization or sales of concentrates, edibles, so let's say more involved branded products, which I think that's a great example for the world. It was quite unexpected at this time, really.
Yeah, entirely. I think in terms of what they're doing, we couldn't quite get the same, because the lobbyists for big pharma and whatever else, the corrupting elements within the Western regulation reform movements are not quite going to allow the same. I think, Thailand is an anomaly entirely, because again, they want to give the citizens the right to grow their own. They want to give the people the opportunity to cultivate a relationship with cannabis, rather than just going, wait, we can make money. What does it do? All right, quick, market it, and just holding and hoarding all of this information. I think it's arguable that it is the largest clinical trial. They're giving it to the citizens, and they are going to obviously watch what happens. The government has the largest data set of basically anything on its citizens. It can monitor them through health, through crime, through insurance, through food regulation. Because again, the other part of it is, you said in Thailand, the main point is it's about the plant. So first the plant, so it's turning up as a food source in a massive amount of places. It's turning up infused in various different things. It's also then going back to as a textile. They're looking at it as reformative agricultural practices. They're looking to actually reintegrate cannabis back into day-to-day life in Thailand, whereas predominantly, especially the UK, as I said, my sort of analogy before is that wherever the most money has come, the speculation, wherever they can make it look that, this round B investment's very appetizing, come on, lads. And they're already thinking round C and D. All they're worried about is perception of the size of the company. They don't care about the people. And to my point before, as you said, there's some wonderful people in CBD. Please, anyone's listening to this, don't get me wrong, some wonderful souls in this industry in the UK that I just want to get the twats out of the way. Just literally get them out of the way, because what they will do with this plant, with a pure CBD focused mindset, they will have wonderful R&D opportunities, and they will bring to the market great opportunities for everyone. Whereas if we end up with these restrictive systems, all this research and development is going to happen in labs and in warehouses and in places we'll never get to see. And only a country like Thailand will be only one of the places where they'll pop up this information, and then the UK government will go, well, we don't accept foreign data and foreign information and studies. So we'll end up back to square one with it. So, Cefyn, I've seen you being eager to get in for a minute there, so hit me.
No, I've been enjoying the narrative being played out here. At the end of the day, I think you're all spot on. And going back to what Kyle was saying in regards to the crash, I remember 2018, the average price for a kilo of CBD isolate was $7,500, but that could go up to 22 to 24 grand, depending on what part of the grow cycle or grow season that we were in at the time. Now it's less than 400 quid a kilo. So you can kind of see why there's this kind of massive push in the US to get as much as they can off CBD, to the point of discovering kind of broken, or shall we say forced decarboxylation chains. And it is curious but kind of frustrating, because as we look and see all of this stuff, so are the other powers that be looking and seeing all this stuff. And I used to think it was just GW, right? That was the company that was kind of holding bits and pieces down. But I saw a statement from GW the other week, that stated that they recognized synthetic cannabinoids as competition, right? And I'll tell you another thing that was in my head. All controlled cannabinoids have got someone with a patent kind of tied into them. But there's cannabinol C3 or CBV or cannabivarin. Like, that one doesn't seem to be owned by anyone that I can find, or has a patent on it. But then that's an interesting thing. Why is it there? It doesn't even have psychoactive effects. So to me, that says that there's more people in this industry than just GW that have got a stake and that are going to kind of be vying for that space. We've also got to think about the Tiger report as well, where it states that the UK should be pushing towards a medicinal CBD and cannabinoid industry. Well, I don't think there's any space in the industry for supplemental CBD if medicinal CBD is the focus. And certainly that does worry me quite a lot. And it is kind of certainly finding out all of these people, what their intention is. And I hate to say work together, because unfortunately there's agendas there, but if there's some way that we could come together and dissolve all of those barriers that kind of slice up the plant left, right and center, then obviously the world would be a better place. Yeah,
it's obviously not going to help your Vanguards, your Black Rocks, your private I'm probably going to name that one. So there's certain obviously elements. We'll say Kingfisher is just another one we'll throw in there just for the crack. Yeah, I might edit that out. Anyway, someone's gonna fucking click it out, clicking back and forth. Who's he saying? I'm saying nobody. I said nothing. Anyway, my point was that those boys, they own between them trillions upon trillions upon trillions of investment. And let's take BlackRock. Who's that? Larry Flink, the guy that runs that. So that dude owns Aladdin. Aladdin is an investment AI machine that controls, what is it, like 20 trillion or something in assets, combined assets through other ventures. And that's in fuel, gas, and like fossil fuels. So that's in big tobacco, that's in alcohol, that's any industry that you've ever heard of big attached to. So agriculture, food, whatever, they own huge stakes in that. All of the data from all of those industries is fed back into this to then determine where they should put investment in different cycles. So that's the machine and the apparatus that is determining at what point cannabis should come on board. As we said, Thailand is an anomaly. Italy is another one where its citizens triggered a referendum. For all the government kind of fucked the referendum up, the citizens fucked up the government. So they've got another opportunity with the incumbents. Obviously, with Germany coming on board next year, there's going to be other citizen-led movements. Don't get it wrong, folks. It's not going to be the big pharma lobbyists and thinking, you know what? Your people deserve weed. Let's just change the law. Just let them have it. Let them have it. We'll figure out our profit share later. Just let them have it. That's not going to fucking happen. It's going to have to be these citizen-led initiatives. And I know we don't have the same ability to trigger referendums and stuff that they do in other countries, or to get citizen-led ballot initiatives in local regions. But we can conglomerate. We can, come together and incorporate in a way that means that we have power, we have influence, we have the ability to take big corporate loans, we have the ability to bring in investors, because at the end of the day, they don't care about what model goes through. They just want to make money at the end when we get to the end of the fucking motorway. So if we can show them that our lane's faster and that we can clear the fucking traffic, they'll switch that money out. They'll stop fighting to create these narrow spaces because, a billion here, a billion there. The true nature of cannabis is it's going to reform and reshape the surface of the fucking planet. It truly is. When you look at it, is beyond a drug in terms of as a resource, a building material. You've now got in South Africa, is it a 10-story skyscraper that they're building down there using cannabis rebar and concrete? You know, there's projects kicking off all over the place where people are trying to understand how to utilize this as a material. You know, I mean, just in infrastructure in that way. You think of graphene supercapacitor batteries. You've obviously got viable petroleum replacement in oils and ethanol fuels. You've bioethanol fuels. You've then got fucking plastics. You know, for polymer, for molds, for 3D injections and things like that. There's so many other avenues. And then the food source. Going back to that, you want to talk about the food crisis that we're facing right now. Cannabis seed oil is a complete protein. It's all 11 non-essential and essential amino acids. You know what I mean? It's nearly a perfect balance of omega-3 and 6. There's a reason this thing is so powerful as a plant. And I think it is, this is one of the great opportunities for us to change the direction of humanity. I know it sounds a bit grandiose and whatever else, but it's if we win the plant, it doesn't almost matter what they do on the other bits. Because then we've always got access. We'll never give them their money. We'll never patronize their businesses. We won't give them their service. They'll serve to themselves in their little insular, oh, well, we know cannabis and we know what we're doing. Indica sativa, la, 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 la. While we just go light years ahead. Cannabis is a resource that, in my opinion, could give us a Star Trek future. We're already looking at the fact it's graphene. You run salt water over graphene, generates electricity. Then there's a battery you can get wet in salt water that generates more electricity. Why the fuck are we not looking at this? Do you know what I mean? There's so many other potential avenues of its thermodynamic properties as well for energy storage and conductivity. Do you know what I mean? There's so many other, we're so stuck with, no, CBD has to be this is hemp and has to only be this and this and this. You can only have 3 of like, it is the ultimate fucking resource. Our history is built on it and our future depends on it at this point. And I've just gone on a bit of a tirade there. But that's where I feel that we are. I'm hoping that some people that CBD can then see this. THC is not a threat to you. I've just been to the launch of another lounge in Teesside. That's 3 fucking clubs in Teesside right now in the northeast of England. None of them see it as competition because it's not. Where one is, others thrive. Do you know what I mean? We're blazing trails. We're breaking down the forest around it. That's a terrible analogy. I was going to say it's clear to build our civilization. Do you know what I mean? But it's the many hands make light work. And I truly believe that if there was a camaraderie, if there was a kind of parley between these different sectors. I mean, I myself, obviously, Kyle, you know this, I'm trying to back off on some of my black and white thinking on terminology and, you know, be a bit more empathetic with people that are using certain language. Because they're the ones whose intentions are pure, you know, what is it, the Jesus thing, forgive them for they know not what they do. Do you know what I mean? And I think that unified education, bringing us all back to a point, we've got an opportunity to get through.
So, yeah, on that front, to address, I'm not sure if I'd mentioned to you since I've seen you last, Simpa, but from our previous discussions of the whole hemp cannabis terminology use and all this, because we're in the situation up here that some of the local farmers into their second year and things, and there's all mixed involvements and interests and intentions and different use and all this what's going on. But under the perception, let's say, you know, the perception still there seems still this drive of we have to go out there and educate the public about what's different of hemp was different from cannabis, completely different. And actually the only accurate terminology I can come to, and this is after spending some time on this, being around the scene and all different research, the way we use the terminology hemp is a recent political construct framework of sorts, and it's used to describe the non-narcotic use of the cannabis plant. That's the only accurate description we have of what hemp is, the non-narcotic use of the cannabis plant, because there isn't any other way to split it. If you're going to say that, oh, if it's over 0.3%, that's now like not hemp. It's like, well, what if a hemp plant goes over 0.3? Yeah. Is it now not on you go? What are you going to? I suppose
the only caveat I would add to that is legal, because I'm just thinking, you know, mate, I'm an arse, and I'm just thinking, say, then if I've got a grow on in another room, and I then had all of that stock of material, I can go make some cannabis bricks.
Right.
It was never hemp. It was. Do you know what I mean? I could make that into plastics. Do you know what I mean?
Okay, sure, but it actually covers all, because what I had in mind with that terminology, let's say, was we look back in history, other cultures, let's say where the UK first became aware of cannabis out in India, for example, where a lot of the plants that are grown there, where they have multiple use, as and they're grown for hand rubbing, for medicinal and drug purpose, but they're also using the fiber of the plant for hemp purpose. So we either need to recognize that the cannabis plant can do all the same things the hemp plant can, or the only accurate terminology is the way we describe hemp now is a recent political construct. And the other reason I add that is back in the 90s is the time where they started separating the gene pool to try and say, this is what hemp is, that it's all going to be CBD dominant. Now, it was typically CBD dominant in fiber, but there were THC dominant phenotypes came through. And back in the 90s, when they were looking at this in the EU, in Italy, one of the varieties, Campana Ayeta, I think it's the name of it. I've got the analysis of it. There was a paper where they had some phenotypes were at 2% THC, and that was a traditional fibrous variety, and it wasn't able to be considered hemp. It had been used for hundreds of years as hemp, but once the 90s came with a new terminology of what hemp was, it didn't fit the bill until it went through further breeding to then re-enter the market as hemp.
Isn't it interesting that there's a divergence in language in a very close amount of time between them creating hemp and all of a sudden hemp licenses suddenly existing and the ability for people to look at this as a potential agricultural crop as the discovery of the endocannabinoid system, and then the understanding that THC has already had historically recognized, patented, proven applications medicinally. So then in order to restrict that, but then get the other side, rather than just letting cannabis out there and growing, because again, there's some wonderful studies coming out of America from their air quotes hemp industry that are then showing the difference of their 1% cap, what the efficacy of the plant, the health of the plant, the volume in terms of seed production, and do you know what I mean? And then in terms of return for oil and investment per acre is increasing in certain areas with certain genetics. And so obviously then if you measure it on a graph, basically the more THC you add to a plant, the more productive the plant then thus becomes. Do you know what I mean? So as you said, for multiple use, I think, again, it's gone back to a company, then they have the plant, because right now we are destroying the best carbon sequestration technology on the fucking planet, or rather we are wasting it. We are fucking entirely wasting it, because then anywhere that's got a country that has segregated this, you either get your license for that fibrous material, like what's your hemp usage, or you get it for your drug use. But do you not think what happens to all of that hemp stuff for the drug people? It goes in mulch, it goes in incinerators, it goes in bins. They're not legally allowed to process it because then they have to get a hemp license. So there are these, again, to me, that seems one of the starting points of this divergence, where then it went, all right, crap, you guys, now you're CBD, so you'll get separate, because then you guys can invest in like orange peel conversion through synthesis, fucking yeast manipulation of excretion, all the rest of the other methods that they've come up with. Do you know what I mean? And then that then broke it. Right, you guys, you're now medical, great little the lane, medical, right? And the same people are interlinked with all of them. It is the same people scratching each other's backs because they are waiting for their grand payday in their eyes. They're waiting for cannabis to be alcohol, and they own every fucking pub. Sorry, that left some dead air.
Yeah, I think there is the space for the different frameworks, and it is but in the bigger picture, I do see it as a sort of unfolding and acceptance of sorts of the way society moves. It's not generally society on a whole is not up for rapid leaps and bounds, and the Thai situation is an anomaly in the process. But and then all these other vested interests and misconceptions and plans get involved along the way, and we are discussing them.
Is it not also then? I suppose I'm a Scottish farmer. Cannabis is a drug. It's horrible. Smell it in the cities, bloody hippies, dirty youth. I'm struggling financially and bumping into you one of these meetings, end up taking on a farm. Oh, I'm now growing hemp. So it's good looking hemp that. It's not cannabis, that's hemp that. Can they not, and it's not to have a go at any of them necessarily personally, I'm just kind of put myself in that position. My mind would then go, I've done this for financial reasons. I want to keep the farm. I want to keep the kids' legacy. Do you know what I mean? a larger cannabis industry means more investment into a larger cannabis framework or matrix of systems of decortication, of distribution, of, extraction, of movements of people, then lobbying governments, changing laws to be more beneficial to that. The support for me of cannabis helps hemp. Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? And then also then they can move to, if they wanted to, then you get larger cultivars, because then if there isn't this disparaged network, then he could then grow potentially a larger yielding plant. I mean, if you know that obviously a THC high rich cultivar, that then if it's shocked and starts producing seeds, a lot of the THC starts breaking down to CBN because as part of to create the casing to protect the seed, the seedling. The seed as it develops. But in that plant, you get far more seed yield from a THC plant than you would from the CBD plant. But in the process, you also get, again, with investment, potential to refine and remove other components, so you can get, again, multiple use from it.
Oh yeah, we haven't at all optimized because of these limitations the way it's viewed at. Exactly, no, you're absolutely right. I'm well aware, even on like seed production. I know it's phenol has been grown up here, which is of a North Russian autoflower ruderalis type background, which grows well up in the north. It's been well tested as a nutritional profile. It's probably one of the most, I think it's had the whole genome sequence and all that's available, and the results have always shown to be the perfect balance of all what should be in there, the omega-3, 6, 9 ratios. We've had it tested in Scotland at Aberdeen University. The same has shown up there, but that's a good one. But we haven't at all explored to optimize what could be for seed food production yield. I mean, companies are on it now, but the whole, it's all with extra licensing, the extra cost, and some other institution to be involved just to look at this. And amongst the farmers, I say there's quite a nice diverse mix, ranging from some families that are looking in, or let's say looking in on the Canadian picture and thinking that's just around the corner next, and they're going to be setting up a greenhouse and look at the price of the kilos of that, to another farmer who's like been doing it for a year, and he's like, I'm feeling the heat being involved in hemp. I've had the police have been out for a couple of times checking because somebody's walking past and they phoned the police, and just, he's got his license and all, but just the idea to interrupt him in his farming day to come out there with the police car and say, well, some people were, you're on the thing here. Could we just have a little look at your field because it's been reported? Just look at, that's fine. Have a wee chat about hemp, take up an hour of his time, whatever it is. And it's all good and well, but it's just a lot more sort of around it than just getting on with it as it could be with a crop. So it's not been optimized at all for those reasons, and the restrictions on all that with cannabinoids and things, for sure. Actually on the ties up with the history of cannabinoids being in the food chain. This is something that's often, let's say, known of or spoken about as a concept, like in the States, how the wild ditchweed and things being around. And some of the ditchweed and some of the American lines of hemp, that it was over 100 years ago, where they hybridized Asian and European hemp. And Asian hemp is more descended from, as a higher ratio of THC dominant plants, also has more of THCV, CBDV than the European hemp turns up. But there's a study from, I think it's late 80s, it's about 87 or maybe 90 latest, from northern Pakistan, and they did THC drug testing on the cattle that graze on the wild plants there. And because the plants are a combination of just a combination of wild indica lines, Asian hemp lines, which have not been segregated to remove THC dominance and things like this. And 50% of the cattle tested positive for THC. And in the community, 1/3 of the children tested positive for THC in their urine for THC metabolites through the milk in the food chain. Now, I don't think it's been reported any what's the documented concerns of what's going on up there, but there's actually, you know, that's in the history of cows where eating hemp used to have more THC. That was going through in the food supply. It's only since the late 90s we've reframed exactly what hemp is, and the states have been for a long time trying to remove any wild plants, and now we stop the cattle from eating it. And
it's interesting. There are a few.
It's a good job, really. Sorry, mate. Yeah, it's a good job. Have you heard I think it was within the last year of a load of sheep in Wales come across a stash, chowed down on it, and then went on a rampage in a village.
Amateurs, fucking amateurs, can't handle the weed. First time they were on it, they're causing a scene.
Its body weight, if it was a cow, it would have been fine.
Yeah, that's it. And those cows are adapted to it, man. They'll have grazed in the direction of the weed.
I was going to say, I'm sure those sheep are causing a scene every weekend. It's only the fact that they were eating the cannabis plants.
Exactly. Yeah. When they're out drinking on the lash, they don't care about it. When the lambs are on the street with cider, they don't give a shit. Yeah. But an interesting point then here, not to kind of crash your quite well workshopped descriptor or sort of descriptor of what hemp is. There's obviously a movement in the UK the minute that is separate, or at least seemingly, from the fact that they have different APPGs, they have different regulatory bodies, different organizations championing for their causes. Yet this hemp lane is in the UK is currently championing for the right for a hemp license to be able to grow and extract from the flowers. Because currently, anyone that doesn't know, if you get a hemp license in the UK, well, firstly, I'm going to point out, just to be an arse, it actually says low THC cannabis license on it. But sorry. Secondly, I'm very childish. You know, it's my birthday today. It's in 34. You cannot fucking tell. So basically, you get your low THC license, and there's a clause in that basically says you are not allowed to extract from the flower heads. You have to destroy the flower heads, basically in the leaves, basically anything that produces the trichomes, where obviously the cannabinoids, the terpenes, flavonoids, and all the other wonderful minor compounds are found. They're obviously rallying to get this up to a 1%, similar to match what America's doing, what is a subtle movement across Europe to try and do the same. It seems to be the global standard they want is this 1% THC as part of the limit of hemp. So with these two different channels, I mean, they're fighting and they're stuck in two different lanes. But if then hemp gets through, what happens there? Do all these CBD companies suddenly now move into this lane and they're all allowed to go, oh, yeah, we will always hemp. Is there a hemp extract? Or is they going to lock these other guys out? Are they in competition?
We still have the problem of the food products end of all that. We have the licensing and the field end. It's how I see the whole thing being fairly slowed down. And actually, the last update on you're saying the 1% angle, Europe went for 0.3%, just from 0.2 back up to 0.3, which I don't know. So that was that. And here in the UK, through the CIC and Scottish Hemp Association, we've been pushing for 1%. Believe the latest update in some of the papers, we're now seeing 0.3% in the UK, which that's
ridiculous. We voted for Brexit. We will not be aligning with Europe. We want our own bloody limit.
This is the thing. If we've got the opportunity, 1% is going to be the new global standard. We've been saying that for some time. I've been pushing this line, and all the evidence states that. And to have some case that allow the 0.3% varieties, and okay if they go over that or go hot a little bit, that doesn't solve the problem of not allowing the other genetic diversity onto the scene, and it greatly restricts. I mean, like if Switzerland, where they allow up to 1%, if you talk to the folks who have the full range of genetics there, they will tell you that just as soon as you go at 0.3 and just above 0.3, there's a whole new range of genetics available that consumers prefer. And I wouldn't want to see that.
You can breed into that. You can breed into that range a lot easier as well. This is what people forget, and without, I don't know, maybe we should touch on this, but you got someone like, obviously, the ACI's recommendation for its THC level that obviously caused an incredible amount of stir of 0.03, I think it was, wasn't it? And it's just and a fucking absurdly low to get down. Obviously, that's product, but even to then create from an extract from a plant, to get a whole plant product to that level is just not possible. or it is possible that the refinement process means you're losing the majority of the benefit of the product anyway, and the cost of it means that you're pricing it out of your consumer's range anyway.
I think that particular example was also then put in, was it the 0.04 up to 0.2% range into the sort of over-the-counter prescription type medication. So I know there are some in the industry who possibly see that model of novel foods being busy as it is with a novel isolate and everything, and maybe whole plant goes through, maybe it doesn't, but there's others who are keen on the idea of this whole plant up to the 0.2%, as we've considered the hemp market, for this to be moved to a sort of a low-grade medication over the counter, like you get Esplin, ibuprofen, which just not what the industry is asking for either. Plus, that would be a strange complication for, let's say, the sort of CBD products that are in the specials department of the clinics, which, most of them are not on the road to, going through the clinical trials to be an NHS product. They're going to remain available as specials.
As long as it's off-label and legal in some region, it is then able to then be prescribed. It then exactly that. It's not going to fall under the restrictions of the regulations of any of those other lanes. And so again, it's this split investment. So if we then see if hemp wins, I'm not going to keep using the terms hemp, medical, whatever. I'm not going to keep fighting my own language. I'm talking colloquialisms and fucking what do you call it? What we all sort of use is daily language just for a minute. So I'm not spending all my time correcting my own language. But yeah, so then if this hemp lane wins and they suddenly get extraction in the UK, is that CBD they're extracting? Is it medicine? Does that mean that they're going to be those farmers, to say it's again the industrial that lane of hemp, they're producing all of this hemp as far as they're concerned. They then sell it to XYZ. It can go to then fiber, fabric, go towards fuel, whatever. Does this mean that then in order to make that medical CBD, it has to be produced in a different, because it's all going to end up coming from the same plants in the same field?
Well, I think the ones who be pushing for it to be as a medical are not pushing for in the same breath farmers harvesting it for their fields. They'd be the ones who want up to 0.2%, and then they'll be pushing for some controlled greenhouse, low THC production license. And actually, as you mentioned, Simpa, about the license, you're exactly right, which this also reminded me of the terminology that the UK government also recognises that. You get a license to grow low THC cannabis plants with permission to produce from them industrial hemp, which is everything except the flower and the cannabinoids and the resin, etc. So that's where I came up with all my terminology of even the UK government sort of frames it as such. You get you get a cannabis license, but you can only produce the industrial hemp.
But that kind of, sorry, I was going to say that kind of screws the farmers again then, because they're not growing hemp, they're growing cannabis. Then when they've cropped it, it's hemp. No, the whole plant, because they're not. The seeds you're going and getting, it's over the genus plant, itemized, internationally recognized in the botanical encyclopedias, Cannabis sativa L. Whatever subgenus. So then they're growing cannabis, getting cannabis seeds, put them in the ground. So then, again, this is why the language is so muddy. This is why I end up getting down some avenues and shouting at people, and I don't mean to. Do you know what I mean? So I get, and I think it should then almost remain the same. But then, like I'm saying, it's going to really muddy the waters if all of a sudden they're growing hemp and cannabis. So they take the cannabis off and there's hemp. So, but if I think this flower makes it cannabis, doesn't it?
I think this is why some people as well, or some in the system, don't want the hemp low THC cannabis varieties to be separated in a non-licensed way. They want to keep the whole thing in a sort of controlled, like we see it reasonable to drop the licensing for just agricultural farming purposes, make it simpler in some way. But I think there's interests that would like to keep the whole thing licensed under that way. And, I would like to see that whole from the field and farming thing coming. And we've got the food issue, we've got the controlled content in the processing, and we've got the interests who then like to supply from the greenhouses or import from other supply chains. So all those dynamics are at play here, I would say.
Yeah. It's all very complicated, isn't it? Okay, so because that I'm just seeing again, I keep going back to this analogy because it's the image in my head. Maybe it is literally how long I've spent staring at the back of fucking lorries on the motorway. So we're on the road. What if one of these lanes crashes then? What if it then completely fails right now? So if hemp and CBD moves through in that way, they suddenly get extraction in the UK. We're allowed 1%. And without muddying the language, they get hemp licenses, but they're also then selling CBD. Some of it is quality enough that it then goes towards, it hits GMPs in terms of manufacturing and packaging and distribution, etc. So it can then be medicinal, sorry. Then you've got obviously all the fibrous material and all of that sort of industry. Does that mean then in that CBD lane is only going to be the isolates, the people that don't truly don't want to be associated to cannabis? To not name any brands, but there are some brands out there that go out of their way to not be hemp or cannabis. It's CBD. It's only CBD. CBD is the only thing that's in it. CBD doesn't matter what CBD is or where it came from. CBD, it's the wonder drug. You need it. Do you know what I mean? Are they going to be stuck in that lane? Or my fear, maybe my paranoia in some way, is that they'll try and co-opt and corrupt other lanes in order to make sure that their investment ultimately pays off.
Oh, hold on. Have you just described novel foods there?
Ooh, maybe. Maybe
it's the car crash that doesn't need to happen. But I don't think there's as many lanes out there as you think. Of course, there is a bit of confusion. There are certainly APPGs that are kind of going here and going there, but including this. And you've also got one association who's got their own lobbying arm, which is quite interesting. 1st of November, that's the ACI's 1st November group, sorry. And thing is, who gets there first? Do they get there first and then have an influence on the Tiger report? Because, it's all good, these entities having this say left, right and centre, but, it's the politician's choice. So if they do say, well, medicinal CBD, medicinal cannabinoids, there is going to be that kind of distinction, and that narrowing, because as it is at the moment, you can only have pharmaceutical grade CBD if it's grown indoors. You can't have it if it's outdoors. But then, if you give the outdoor farmers the chance to grow food and, people the chance to grow medicinal products inside, there needs to be that kind of distinction, a transparent barrier, should we say. But I don't think there is. Certainly when you look at the companies that are validated at the moment, they kind of get me, because most of them have either got medicinal kind of research going on at the moment, or have got access to high spec labs that kind of give them an MHRA angle. Food companies aren't going to have that. There is going to be a CBD medicinal sector, whether we like it or not. Who gets there, who influences it, don't know. But that separation needs to occur, because at the moment, we see a validated company, like I said, with medicinal claims and ties to the MHRA, whilst any other CBD company in a food setting that is specified as a supplemental company wouldn't be able to get away with that whatsoever. So yeah, there's a blurring of a line that needs to kind of come through. But like I said, I don't think it matters who gets there. It's up to the politicians on how they implement the Tiger report, if that is the way forward.
Yeah, interesting. So the other avenue and the other thing that I want to discuss then is, all of a sudden we have flowers. Flowers are everywhere. We've had a general ramping and upwards trajectory of fuckery towards, say, tobacco. So the tobacco consumers themselves have been demonized, vilified, of being forced to have these horrible packaging. Still stating the truth, and arguable. But if you then look at what has sort of happened within that industry, and then you look at what has happened with profit share, you look at then what has happened with diversification of crops. So now, because of this limitation of tobacco, it's collapsing in traditional markets. So shout out Weed World, shout out your boys at Weed World, boys and girls at Weed World. And there was an article in last issue, not the current issue that's just come out, talking about Zimbabwe. I'm talking about their tobacco crop is collapsing to a point now where the investment to then grow cannabis outdoor for the farmers is a far better investment for the individual low-paid farmer. So as more and more areas are brought on board, as you say, like this, it's predominantly going to be this outdoor mass yield crop. So I see a transition coming. We're already seeing it with various, hemp cigarettes and all this other shite branding, where it is these CBD flowers that are then pre-rolled or sold in pouches, and same with that we do with tobacco. Do you think, given the extremity with which the UK has gone against tobacco consumers and smoking as a concept, just look at the medicinal whole angle of, it's criminalized to fucking smoky medicine. Do you think that then if we got those flowers, that would be a market that would be allowed? Do you think there would be angles for this, or do you think it would just be purely for extraction into oils, into isolates?
That's a big question. I think Kyle's probably the best one to answer that one.
Well, the whole thing is, if we were to be pushing just for this 0.3% limit, if that's what then happened and it wasn't 1%, as many of us have been calling for, making the case for, that would significantly alter the appeal of the available flowers in that range. And so I think actually it's worth giving a mention to, again, the outcome of trying to find a way when there's obstacles in place. So on the 0.2% flower concept, of the varieties that are 0.2, like, you really struggle to find anything that's like over 6% CBD or so, typically from that European listing. That would be on a really good phenotype. And then what's happened, some of the flowers that come in from Switzerland, I'm not sure if you're familiar, but basically they're going through a stripping down, rearrangement and reassembling process to put them back together with higher CBD and terpenes and without the THC. So it's really just the flower material which has been stripped, reassembled and put together, sprayed back together, or however they've done it. I don't know, there's various techniques as to how they could get to that point. But then you see a flower in the shop that says 15% CBD and 0.2 THC or whatever, and it's just not, it wasn't like that originally, and it's some weird formulations being put together. So yeah, that would be, if we got harvesting from the field and it was only up to the 0.3%, I would be concerned that market would be crippled and it would just move on to the CBD superior varieties coming from greenhouses and licensed production, which ends up in either the new cannabis space or products, and the whole idea of farmers getting it from the field could be hampered or hindered one way or another through those decisions and the regulations and process, whether that's intentional or not. Mm-hmm. Still have a wee bit concerns about that. But I would love to see the farmers market angle of, hopefully, let's say if it was in the current varieties we had, or was restricted in the 0.3% range, farmers market harvest, hemp tea, things like that. That would be a great upgrade on where we're at. We're a tea drinking nation. Let's have a push for a local harvested hemp tea with some good local flowers. That would be cool.
Yeah, I mean, with the heat of boiling tea, you do get a very slight, slow carboxylation process. So you do get the cannabinoids in availability. I'm very grateful for you bringing up this point. I've seen some atrociously labeled CBD flower across this country, and you just look at the numbers and go, what the fuck? Like, that's not how the plant works. I mean, we're starting to see there's a few companies, I'm not going to shout them out to not show a preference to anybody, that are now in different regions in Europe. That's one of them is operating in Italy, for example, and they've basically doubled that. So they're now hitting 12, 13% CBD because they're up to that 0.6. So it seems to be that there is a gaugeable incremental lifting there. So yeah, if we can then get up to 1%, what's that? You're then talking closer to 20% CBD. Do you know what I mean? So then 1% THC, 20%. So we can get around that 20-to-1 ratio or something like that because of the anti-psychoactive effects of CBD, the way that it modulates sort of the uptake of it on receptors, etc., means that it's going to mitigate more of that THC level. So it's almost arbitrary going, oh, this amount of THC is scary, that it's the way it's presented and the way it's consumed.
Yeah.
So what I was thinking of the Zimbabwean farmers, the way they then produce and dry their crops and whatever, it's very low tech. Do you know what I mean? So then if they then move into cannabis in this space doing a similar sort of thing, what I was thinking is effectively you end up with shake cigarettes. So you just see them over giant things sieving off the cannabinoids effectively. And then I just saw in my head this industry of these cigarettes, and then they add back in the measure the shake sort of thing, or the even isolates, because what we're seeing from, it's not just Switzerland, a lot of different markets. It is purely straight off the field. What is supposed to go in the bin, be destroyed as per licensing in various regions. It's then being sprayed with whatever we're seeing, even just food grade terps and whatever else. That in terms of volatilization, when you burn these, vaporize them, we don't know the consequences of these things. There's a lot of stuff that they're adding into this, as you said before, about like HHC, THCP, all these other novel cannabinoids that we're now discovering as a consequence or as a result of them trying to circumnavigate the rules and legislation as they stand today. I'd like to see what you're saying, that hemp stays as hemp, but my problem then is that if we get to this flower point, it's again then going to muddy the waters, and we're then going to come back to this convergence point where we may as well have just been cannabis the whole way through. Do you know what I mean? I think that the rising tide lifts all boats. And so that if we can somehow manage to work together in a way that ensures the best interests of all parties, because as I said before, at the minute, it's only because they got started decades ago. They got started with the whole Royal Commission GW con, without going too much into that. And that's when this really started to go, okay, here, there, and everywhere. And this is just like phase 4, phase 5 for them in their little Marvel universe of investment. Whereas if we can prove that there's a rival, not quite a DCU, but a better alternative sort of there to rival it, we can bring that investment over, because again, they just want the money at the end of the road. And I think that the more people can realize that in the CBD sector, the hemp sector, the medicinal industry, whatever part of it you are, if you are cannabis, I think we need to come back to cannabis to get those next steps. Otherwise, it just seems to be getting slower and harder to gain this ground any further in any lane,
Yeah, do you know what? Canvas. Cultural cannabis. So just going back, why isn't it called hemp fast or whatnot?
Interesting. I mean, cannabis is actually the more prevalent term. So people like to go, oh, well, hemp was the word. But actually, if you look through Germanic, if you look through, I think even Saxon as well, actually, it goes through, and a lot of the Nordic roots, it's versions of cannabis. And all the way through Greece and whatever, it's versions of cannabis, not hemp. But then there are obviously a lot of versions in the later developments in Europe that then had the versions of hemp, that again through Germanic and whatever. So there were roots of both of the terms, but they're so interchangeable. It was the same thing. Do you know what I mean? And
on you go, Simpa, sorry.
No, so I was, so they were so interchangeable that until again there was a need to then break these down. I mean, we can't go and prove it, but if you look at then the hemp that was then growing in the UK, that will have not been restricted to 02. It wouldn't have been a Henry VIII going there, nah, that's cannabis, get rid of it. Do you know, there was none of those things. So there have been all the wonderful, beautiful varieties, and anyone that's ever grown, a multitude of seeds from one variety will get to see the various phenotypes and chemovars that come from that. That then leaving that in the wild environment, allowing it to naturalize and actualize to its environment, we get all sorts of diversity. So again, for all there was human preference and intervention, there still would have been all of these other things. So it's a very sort of muddy history when you look at it. And it seems to come down to basically, you brought up Indian hemp before, ironically. Indian hemp was kind of the colloquial term for cannabis as a drug. Do you know what I mean? So it's
yeah, I was going to say that on the whole terminology thing. So I've done quite a bit of research on the 1840s, 50s, when we all got back into it in the UK, thanks to the reports coming out of India at the time. And Scotland was actually the site of one of the first, what's known as a common garden experiment, to compare European hemp with what they called Indian hemp. But it would be, let's say, ganja, narrow leaf drug type varieties, as opposed to Asian hemp. They didn't have all this separation of understanding the lines at the time. But Edinburgh at the Royal Botanic Gardens, it was around 1849 it was, they planted seeds that they got from the Bombay Bazaar, and they also planted European hemp along next to it. They came to the conclusion that it was the same plant and the same species. I think there was a slight misunderstanding that the Indian hemp is what they call Indian hemp, the Indian cannabis variety, didn't complete flowering in Scotland or in the greenhouse. Once it got to October, it wasn't too thrilled with the weather. It wasn't developing further, and it said that flowering seemed to stop, and it was just right at the early. And also they noted that it didn't have the same strong smell as it gave off as when it was in its native place in India, but the European hemp was sort of finishing up and doing its things on course. But they sort of came to the conclusion it was the same plant. It just didn't get to complete its flowering here. There may have been the misunderstanding that the European one if put in India might then like produce some of the other compounds we're used to seeing there, but that was done at the time. And yeah, so Indian hemp was the terminology used for just everything coming from India of cannabis. You know, they used that for blocks of charas that were being sent to Edinburgh for medical experimentation. That was from Indian hemp, as it was known. And as I mentioned earlier in this chat here, that it's documented that it was being grown for multiple use, you know, the charas for drug and medicinal purpose, but also being used for fiber, and the seeds being used for food purpose as well, multi-cropping, you know. So it's only this recent times we've got this different framing. And actually, you were saying about the THC levels of what we've domesticated of European hemp lines in recent times. Some places where it's escaped in Eastern Europe, or where it's now been 20, 30 years starting to breed, the THC has escaped, the THC level starts to increase naturally when it's been let back out into the wild, when it's been pressed down. It's also worth a mention then on that lines of the cannabis interest in the plant development, that there have been some very rare specimens found in nature of what they call cannabinoid knockout plants. They're known as type 5 plants, where the plant's only really producing terpenes, which has got some interest in food use as well, should they pin down some specifics. But that's some rare, what's the word? Morphological change. It's got mutation of sorts. That's come up. But generally, there's never been plants found in the wild that have no THC, or populations that have no THC, but there were populations found with no CBD, and that was in South Africa coming up 50 years ago. Next year it was. And when they found these populations that had no detectable CBD, it actually completely changed the understanding of how the plant was producing cannabinoids. At the time, they used to think that CBG developed into CBD and then into THC. We now know that CBG goes into either THC or CBG lines, THC or CBD lines from CBG. But until the plants were found with no CBD content, they had thought it went through CBD into THC for some reason, based on what they'd been analysing at the time. The discovery of CBD completely changed that, and then they looked into it and then found out actually it was producing cannabinoids by a different mechanism they thought, and that changed the science at the time. So
interesting, real interesting. I mean, obviously, a lot of theory, a lot of speculation, but the general sort of consensus seems to be the THC works predominantly as it's like UV protection. So where we sort of map out areas around the globe and look at its land races, we can pretty accurately detect, sort of estimate what its profile will look like. Yeah, we can't sort of guess on terpenes, and we're slowly starting to understand more about like co-crystallization and the synergy of how these compounds develop together, because we've forever studied them in isolate and separation, but the entourage effect, which again is gaining more and more acceptability within modern science, it seems to work with this synergy. You can't rebuild this. You can increase the individual benefit of each compound by adding them together, but you're still only rebuilding something. So I think that, yeah, we're waiting on that next discovery. Do you know what I mean? To then.
Well, that ties back to, actually, as you were saying about the tea and things. The tea only gets a slight decarboxylation. It gets, actually, CBD resists decarboxylation more than THC does. Some of the THC perhaps decarboxylates easier with boiling water than the CBD does. But the flavonoids, to get them straight from the plant, which is also my other objection to the way formulations get stripped down to isolated compounds, even if they're reassembled with terpenes. Flavonoids, we have the specific ones to the cannabis plant. It's in all the hemp varieties, canflavin A and B, and that's known to have a lot of beneficial properties. It's only in recent times we're starting to understand now the synergy between flavonoids and cannabinoids. We know flavonoids have beneficial nutritional intake for us, as a sort of nutritional compound, but there are specific ones which have appear to have a modulatory effect on CB1 signaling as well. So they have an entourage which is not well understood. You can get your flavonoids if we're getting access to tea, but if we're always doing these highly refined, processed, isolated compounds, losing all those benefits. And that's something that I'm very passionate about keeping in the supply chain as well,
But again, it's, in my mind, we need people that are interested in protecting all of cannabis. So there are people that are in pharmaceutical industry, that are in CBD or whatever, that are only interested in CBD and peripheral things, like very close proximity things. Do you know what I mean? They're not interested in understanding the entirety of the plant. It's very frustrating that globally, I think actually maybe Thailand, given what they're looking to do, are probably behind closed doors studying the whole fucking thing, because that's what we need. There are certain compounds found in the roots, for example. There are obviously industrial applications of the roots that I'm not going to name for demonetization and shadow banning purposes on YouTube. There are a multitude of things that we can do with this goddamn thing that, again, just need consensus.
Well, as has already been pointed out, the Scottish are obviously using it for suntan lotion. you still getting that Cheris sent up, are you, Kyle? Sorry, Scotland.
It was described as a block was sent in 1850 to Dr. Christensen in Edinburgh, who wrote his dissertation at the Edinburgh University on cannabis indica at the time, and it was described as a block was sent from Yarkand, Tibet, the size of 2 fists for experimentation. So there you go.
That's a couple of weeks worth of the kids out in the field getting the rub on. Yeah, that's what we're missing again now. Is like it's the intersectionality in the study of the history of cannabis is going to give us far more of an inclination of what this thing can do than just fucking studying its genome and applying single applications to single therapies.
And the other use, just as always, I mean, it's just all these things when you bring them up are so obvious, and we're restricting getting on to finding this out. But the other latest discoveries in hemp and to be used in the flowers, that they found that just a simple extraction of the flowers being used as a crop pesticide, as a natural pesticide on other crops, is working wonders. They're like, wow, imagine that, if you could get on and just extract the flowers that are currently being ploughed into the ground for no reason, while the farmers then struggle with mutant weeds coming up because of all the other things that have been put in the ground for the last few decades, whatever they've been up to, so...
Wouldn't that just depend on the way you do your application? Because I thought they get a little bit narky if you show that you're trying to create a medicine or a food. If you kind of point out that the flower had an industrial application end use, maybe they might be a little bit nicer. Hold on, this is the Home Office, isn't it? No, sorry, step back.
That is definitely an avenue to push, I would say, because we're teetering at the minute with conversations because, unfortunately, a negative consequence of Brexit means that we fall out of certain regulations. Some of them are obviously related to big agriculture, and some of them are to do with the banned pesticides and certain products that they are considering bringing back to the UK that we know are beyond detrimental to especially bee populations. There was a study in 2016, 18, one of them. There's a one in there. I don't know whatever year it was, recently. And they basically found, I think it was 23 different sub-bee populations that were benefiting from the late pollen access to the flowering cannabis in the hemp fields. So again, we're twofold there. Save the fucking bees. You're getting rid of the pesticides that kill the fuckers. You're allowing the plants to be there to encourage them, and then you get to use the end part of the plant to encourage more of them. It's a win-win. Again, it's like why we need to get out of this mentality of cannabis. It's a drug. It's a food. It's a fucking plant. If we get back to the plant, then we can actually start to. If the government looked at cannabis as a plant, well, all right. The drug side, we'll deal with in a minute. This then started to just study the plant itself. They'd come to the conclusion that most of us that have been around this plant most of our lives come to anyway. It is the single most beneficial fucking species that we have. Humanity has grown in it with a synergy, with a symbiosis with this species for millennia, and its absence. Look at what it's led to. Yeah, we've got all our fancy technology and all this shit that plastics and petroleum and all the other stuff has provided. But look at the health of the population, the health of the planet, the ecology, the environment. Things are fucked. And again, if we restrict this to go, you're going to make a drug, it's got to be in a greenhouse and it's going to take this much amount of security and energy and input. And it's like, they've got it right. These guys in India back in the day, you need medicine, you need clothes, you need a fucking fuel to burn. Oh, you need to build a house. It's one fucking plant. You grow the one plant, you take the bits each of you need, and then you just put back in again and go again. So it's interesting. I suppose there's 3 points. I'm aware of time here, but there's 3 things I want to quickly cover. I know they're not going to be quick. One is then potential for Indie Ref 2 in Scotland. Obviously, yourself, you are kicking fucking ass in Scotland. You've gone from 0 farms to what you want currently? 6 farmers you got?
Oh no, there's more 10. Well, sort of 10 around the northeast here, but more of the yeah. Now it's a good handful more.
So clearly, obviously, Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP have always been quite. There's a fucking issue, we want to solve it. Even though they've had power and could have solved some of these fucking problems, they're obviously tied up with certain elements of devolved power from Westminster and caught up with, Home Office's cartel, which is something I want to get on next with yourself, Kevin. So if there then is this Indie Ref 2, do you think, if Scotland rejoins the European Union, obviously they're going to get to ire and all of their hemp rules and regulations and everything else and the fallout of Little Britain and theirs. But they also then have this opportunity for a decriminalized market, a regulated market.
Sure, and even within the hemp situation, we'd have opportunity to do things. As within the EU, like the Czech Republic is, they're allowing up to, I think they're allowing up to 1% plants to be grown, but then there's some. But maybe not those varieties that have been accepted in the food chain compared to the authorized varieties, etc. But there was possibly some other variations there. So I would just say, well, if we had that opportunity, we'd be able to have those discussions and take them a bit further than as it currently is. It then gets restricted and that's out of our hands and is tied down to the Westminster developments as have been trying to get involved in and positively influence. But here in Scotland, there's definitely the opportunity to have some progress and will, and I think we're of the size we'd, hopefully make a few changes. Definitely, with the hard drug problems around, like Dundee, where I saw you recently, Simpa, it's up there in the European the charts of European cities, for both, rates of drug death, high rates of hard drug use, high rates of poly drug use, just across the board consistently. So on a urgent reform and harm reduction way, and from multiple angles, I think there is the will in Scotland for some progress and change if we could do that.
Yeah, definitely. And there's validity to this. Obviously, there's a recent study that came out looking at, I think it was alcohol addiction, looking at alcoholism, and they found not necessarily as substantial, but enough to warrant further investigation around just using CBD to help deal with challenging sort of problematic behavior. Obviously, we know in terms of cannabinoids effects on sort of neuroplasticity, neurogenesis in the brain, and allows people to effectively think different thoughts, get out of those ingrained patterns and behavioral cycles. So I think, there's merit to that kind of argument, and that could come quite well from your industrial hemp farmers. But I think, do you think that Nicola Sturgeon would consider putting it as part of the pledge? Because it could be a hell of a vote winner. They could make some serious bank. I've covered quite a lot of Scotland recently on my road trip, and you want to talk about the potential for flipping warehousing into indoor grow facilities. I mean, everyone's talking about greenhouses and whatever else. It's effectively a euphemism. A lot of the facilities that people use look like industrial things in the heart of places you would not expect them to be.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think she would ever be so brave enough, or do you think there's a means to, nudge her towards?
I don't know if it'll be so bold as the specifics in the pledge, let's say, but should there be some movement, I think there'd be a way to get some momentum and get that going with some of the folks in the MPs and MSPs that are on the scene who would be for it. So might not be so bold as going in the pledge there, but given the opportunity, we'll see.
I mean, even hopefully just on the medicinal side of things, obviously we had Karen Gray on recently telling us all about updating us on the same back and forth that Scotland are having with England over devolved power and regulation of off-licensed medications and etc. And it's causing such a fucking nightmare. And I think even a commitment to something like that, which I mean would automatically come anyway, because Scotland would then have to create its own health service, etc. So then there would be a point to put it as part of the package anyway. But yeah, I would love to see, maybe even just as a social experiment, what would happen if Scotland truly had devolved power, if it wasn't tied up with Westminster, if it was able to really make its own decisions, especially around drug policy. And I suppose that segues in quite nice, because I suppose my question for yourself there, or the catch up for the section with yourself here, Cefyn. The Home Office, they are one of, if not the biggest impediment to any progress in basically any sector or lane that we've discussed thus far. You have been doing some amazing work recently to kind of call out and identify certain problematic relationships between certain industry individuals, or rather entities within the industry, and sort of the Home Office. So could you maybe fill in the listeners, and I suppose myself as well, in what you've been up to with this?
Well, at the moment, I've got to be honest, when it comes to the Home Office, they do seem to have taken a back seat. Certainly validated companies with higher THC level products is proof of that, where the Home Office was supposed to be holding the FSA's hand in regards to all things controlled cannabinoidy. So where they've gone, I don't know. I think they're kind of holding back. There's been a few conversations going on, but in a wider sense of what I've been doing, certainly I've been chasing up novel foods, because I don't think that the FSA are really the bad guys in this. I mean, I don't want to choose the wrong words here, but I do believe that they're being led. Who they're being led by. We could guess. Who are they being led by? Well, we can guess there. But equally, we're just kind of trapped in this situation now, I think, of kind of understanding that. Well, I think they've overstretched themselves with every single movement that's going on at the moment in regards to cannabis. You've got to ask, how many workers have they got going on, and how many workers are focusing specifically on cannabis? Because if they did have someone keeping an eye on novel foods, then you wouldn't have two companies that are selling drugs, of drugs validated as per UK law, as opposed to foods. So they are a little bit kind of out of the question. But certainly when it comes to the FSA, I have officially launched a whistleblowing complaint, because they just don't like answering questions. And to be perfectly honest, I wouldn't be surprised if the Home Office just said, don't ask questions, here's your narrative, off you go. Now, I don't expect that they're going to reply to my whistleblowing complaint, but I have forwarded that complaint to the Scottish Food Standards Association, who they seem a little bit more critical, or at least questioning, of novel foods. So there's going to be hopefully some interesting interactions there, because I mean, ultimately, if the Scottish Food Standards Agency don't kind of raise an interest in potential food crimes, or someone saying that there's food crimes, and the FSA don't either, then we're basically living in an extremely corrupt country where, they're quite happy to just say, this is your food, that's it, get on with it and shut the fuck up. So basically, yeah, it's all about charging that down, mate. I could say that I've been looking into their henchmen in the industry, and by theirs I mean the Home Offices and GWs, the ACI. They've done their damage, they've done their bit. They're just kind of coasting at the moment, from what I'm seeing, waiting for evidence to come in to back up all of the applications that have come through them. But beyond there, I think it's kind of quiet because all the focus is on the FSA. I wouldn't be surprised if the VMD have had no contact about pet products. I'd be surprised if the MHRA haven't noticed a drop in people talking to them about vape products on the market. It is purely that focus, and that focus is which we're being trapped in. But I think people need to realise that there is, it's easy to read certainly what I put out and go, whoa, you don't like the FSA. And certainly I don't like writing shouty articles. But equally, you got to respect the fact that some of these people are doing jobs. They're being directed, and who is directing them. So hopefully I'll be able to give you a few more updates on that at some point.
Excellent. I do look forward to it. I really do. It's great that someone like yourself has really taken up this charge, because, as you say, it's so much open corruption, but it's being done by people that are they're told they're informed. They think they're informed. They think they know what this is. Oh, this is cannabis, that's THC, that's CBD. I don't know what's anything else. It's irrelevant. Has it got that in? No, then it's fine. Has it this? Then no. It's been oversimplified to be able to create this kind of obfuscation of responsibility and acknowledgement of what the fuck the industry actually does as a whole. The left hand doesn't know what the right's doing. Everybody's getting paid along the way, and they're all happy doing their own little thing. And obviously that's been, as you say, constructed. That has been deliberately workshopped to operate in that way for the benefit of whom we can speculate for legal reasons. Probably shouldn't identify anybody, but...
Well, I was going to say something about Jacob Rees-Mogg. Apparently there's a story of him being rather jovial with a contact of mine, talking about one of his colleagues getting busy with 430. Like whatever that is, then we do kind of look at the you can't have controlled cannabinoids. Oh, we're still talking about skunk, even though it's hardly even available out there. And if it isn't literally the left hand to the right hand, as you kind of put it, it's also kind of about stupefying the people into just believing that is cannabis. That's how it's going to be, and you need to get over it.
Yeah, it's a war of nutrition at this point, and we just have to keep our heads above water. You know what I mean? The life rafts will come eventually that we'll get that point to get out. But at the minute, it's a war on drugs. And as part of the war on drugs, we're involved in that. We're in the front lines. Whether you own a CBD shop and you sell vapes and isolate and whatever, in some way you are in that battle. You have a vested interest in the outcome of this war. And no matter how complacent, how comfortable life has made you within this industry, how untouchable and safe you feel, you are one legislative change away from being who we are. I say we, myself and the community I represent, the criminalized consumers, the population that built this fucking industry before any of you kids got out of fucking college. Do you know what I mean? The decades of activists that I take on the mantle to represent in this guise right now, they are the ones that deserve and need this acknowledgement. And again, to loop all the way back to my underlying point of this, it's fighting for cannabis, because they're going to go and have and continue their efforts within the war. Because again, to them, it's a game in a lot of sense of the investors. It's gambling. Well, I'll put some money in weed. Let's see what happens in a few years, and they'll check back in and buy this lobbyist and invest in that event or do this that they're told by their marketeers or the people that they need to put the money into. But they haven't got a fuck about what's actually happening every day. The children who are seizing and dying, the old people who are dying from like Alzheimer's and shit, the stuff that we're starting to understand is potentially not just treatable, but entirely preventable with certain profiles of cannabis products. Do you know what I mean? The evidence is overwhelming in all quarters that the plant is powerful. But then they go, no, we need prove this and this and this. We need these regulations, these restrictions. And I feel that, to go back to kind of the language of, I guess, to not co-opt it, but the language of the civil rights movement in America, is we have to be careful to not use the language of our oppressor, to not get caught in their games, to not end up, in their trip. We don't want to be stuck. As you said, the focus is driven on the FSA at the minute, and everyone is going, well, that's the thing. And it's no, everything else is still there. It's just they're looking that way. So while they're distracted, stuck here, and it's going to take 18 months or a year or whatever, what can we do in 18 months or a year, collectively?
You had it right, mate. You started with war on drugs, and then you kind of brought it through to war on cannabis. I mean, you can see it now. Every single Facebook page for any police force, you scroll down, you'll just see bust. Cannabis. Oh, there was a Class A there, but it's never mentioned. I just had a little scan through the drugs update from Plymouth Live, who were kind of offering some kind of crazy rebuttal from the complaints that they had as a result of promoting Alison Hernandez Woods, of saying that cannabis should be labelled as, up there with heroin and, smack. They created this kind of whole cannabis is moving around the world, but reefer madness. And then they talk about other drugs, even though it's supposedly about drugs, but it's all about cannabis. You see amphetamine, you see coke, and yet you see 4 pictures of cannabis, and you see one picture of what looks like ecstasy and one picture that looks like white powder. There's no representation. There's no fair representation between them all. That war on drugs, I think, is just a cover story for it, in all honesty.
Well, social control, I think, is the simplest way I've always boiled it down to. It's how best to control a populace. I mean, it's entirely embodied, actually, in can't pull the guy's name out my ass, but he was Nixon's advisor, one of Nixon's advisors, and he basically stated about the war on drugs being designed to target hippie and black communities and anti-war communities, and by associating them with heroin and crack and with cannabis, that they were able to vilify them, demonize them, break up their meetings, publicly chastise them before their, political or social revolutions had an opportunity to gain any traction. And so I feel that's where we are now, is that people who are anti-authoritarian, people who are anti the system, people who are a bit alternative, a bit weird, the people that don't fit in, we typically will self-medicate with drugs. We will find our way to drug culture, to the rave scenes, or to free parties, or to house parties, and getting invited to some do after there's exposure everywhere, basically what I'm saying, and that we find in that familiarity, we find in that ourselves, and a sense of comfortability and a sense of identity. And that is powerful, because I myself, I sit here, even in the environment in the area that I live, I'm disconnected from these people. They're disconnected from me because I use drugs and they use drugs, but we can't say to each other we use drugs. You can't bond over that. Do you know what I mean? Because you have to keep each other safe in terms of your environment, what you do. So it keeps us from having those relationships in our immediate space, from all of a sudden, everyone in the street smokes weed. Oh, we go on the street then. If the cops come at the end, we bombard them, we stop them coming in. They're going to try and raid. No, that doesn't happen. Immigration, no, it's not happening. Like, it's in terms of immigration officers trying to remove people. Sorry, that was very simplified in my brain there. But you know what I mean? You can control an area, and then you have political will. You then have your own economy. You have liquidity where you look after each other. Oh, you can't afford your gas bill. Here's some money. You need food. Oh, Sharon's making some. Come around later. We have community. We have power. We have an ability to stand against this neoliberalistic capitalist system that we currently live under. On this arguably late stage capitalism, because it's devouring itself. So again, what are we doing in these times? We're going back to drugs. What is the main predominant drug we're going to? Cannabis. And again, the relationships that people are forming and finding. I've been at loads of events in the UK and watching the delight, the wonder on these fucking 18, 19, 20-year-old kids on their first event, being like, loud dog.
Right, yeah, that's Sprocket. Hold on a second.
No worries.
Come on.
Oh, bless him.
My apologies.
No,
he's quiet on the logo, but not in real life.
Bless him. He's just protecting you from something you can't see, I'm sure. I've lost my train of thought there. Where was I going? What was I saying? Somebody remind me.
Folks to their first events.
Oh yeah, going to the first events and seeing this joy, and like, I didn't know there was anything like this in the UK. I didn't know that this was happening. Do you know what I mean? The excitement within them, and you see more and more in the UK of this new wave of people that are bypassing what a lot of my generation went through, which was chronic alcoholism, then discovering other drugs, and then going, wait, we can do drugs without drinking? Holy shit, let's do that. Do you know what I mean? Because that was the culture that a lot of my people grew up in. You know, you either it was to, you know, a bit of Dutch courage to know, go out of that pill or whatever, or it was just, it got to that time of night and everyone went, oh, we're switching it up, or it just, you had the opportunity to go to parties or whatever. That was the second wave of the rave culture that I grew up in. You know, that was what you did every weekend. Do you know what I mean? And so that, again, that created that tribe, that family, that familiarity that is dangerous to this system. It is antithetical to everything they have spent decades, if not arguably centuries, building as part of this society, air quotes, in the largest sense that we live in. You know what I mean? So the way we fight this, in my opinion, as I said, is we win first back cannabis. And anyone that just wanted cannabis, that's cool for you. You've got it now. But there are people that are in the same position you are with other drug cultures in other areas. And that was the same message I want to put to your hemp farmers, to the CBD industry, to anybody that's involved in this at all. If you have any sincerity, any genuine nature, please question why you have a drug superiority complex, why cannabis is fine, but heroin is bad. I know that's a controversial point, and I've oversimplified it, but my point being that it's still a criminalized culture from a naturally occurring substance that historically had very little problems until capitalism got involved. You know, in China, and what a strong history of consumption of opium wasn't really a problem until we started taxing it, until we started controlling it and regulating it, and then criminalizing it, and then selling it back to them. Naturally, people self-regulate. Look at a pub. Dave's had too much. Mike cuts him off at the bar. You know, John the doorman hails down a fucking taxi. You know, his mate makes sure he gets a kebab on the way home. That cultural, that's what's missing from our drug culture. But people regulate and create that anyway. You see a bunch of dirty smackheads hiding in the corner somewhere. No, that's a community of people trying to protect each other, trying to look out for each other. In the same way, you and your mates in a cannabis club, like, oh, we're getting away with the police are not around. Way. Same fucking thing, man. Same fucking thing. And actually, that ignorant attitude is what is holding us back, because we can't win cannabis unless we win the war on drugs. This is what I'm saying about these different lanes, is the motorway of cannabis, we can get off the junction and go and end the war on drugs, and we bypass all that traffic, baby. You're talking 60 on that back lane, that B road, there ain't going to be nothing on there. That's my underlying point of, I guess, this is that CBD, cannabis, all of this is still relates down to the criminalized actions of, in the most case, naturally occurring products. Do you know what I mean? If we could have opium, just naturally, just smokable opium, do you know what that would deal with? A lot of the opioid crisis, because you wouldn't have these incredibly powerful things that are capable of overdose in a moment. Do you know what I mean? You've got a slow build with opium. And again, it was regulated the same as we're seeing models in Europe, Ultrich, I pronounced that terribly, sorry, my Dutch fans, of the MDMA shop that opened up the other week. They're not selling MDMA, but they're showing the model of how they would. Do you know what I mean? Transform made one for cocaine, for example, as well. There are these models that are arriving around the world. And to kind of close back in from this whole giant narrative I've been on here, I think CBD can learn something from the rest of the world, but we, now being outside of Europe, have an opportunity to do something like Thailand. We could literally do something far fucking better. And it to me, if we win the plant, we have it all. That's what I think Thailand did. There's still restrictions and there's still whatever, but I think Thailand's principal idea is, if the people have a relationship with cannabis, guess what they're going to go and spend their money on? Do you know what I mean? And if you regulate the market and you own it and you are the tax man, that's revenue in your pockets. If the consequence of this is your population smoking less cigarettes, drinking less alcohol, taking less stimulant drugs, less depressant drugs, less SRIs, it's limitless in terms of the potential benefit. It's exponential. And that's my rant over. There's one more point, actually counterpoint. Sorry, and there's one more thing, Kyle. There's a CHS thing I wanted to cover yourself, and then I'll let you go if we've got time. Got time?
Grand, yeah. What's the question, Simpa?
Thank you for taking the time. That's what yourself. You were involved in a study of long COVID and CBD. And I was wondering, per a piece that I found the other day about CHS, which is Cannabis Hyperemesis Syndrome, the prevalence of which, in my opinion, correlates with the rise of a legalized marketplace. Obviously, this study that you were involved in looked at certain genes. So can you help either convince me that it's not a consequence of, I guess, pesticides and bad farming practices at legal facilities, or is it something more? Am I being a bit obtuse here?
So there's I'll just clarify two different wee points there on the long COVID study. One thing actually is worth mentioning in the just bigger context of what's going on. Probably the last time I was on your show, I was telling you how I was very optimistic and excited to hear that there was a long COVID study being done, clinical trial in the UK, and my previous case study of my situation, post-viral fatigue, had been largely influential in the doctor submitting to do this. But I just found out like last week that they still hadn't got 30 people on board to do the long COVID trial in the UK because the doctors not been putting patients forward. They had like 16 out of 30 or so together, only just over halfway there. And that's just, I've no idea. You know, the doctors are the ones saying we need more evidence, and they're the ones not putting forward patients who could be on the trial. And I know that any other trial that's going on with a big famous drug company, that immediately got people signed up. And this happened previously, some of GW's trials with CBD isolate, and that they had trouble getting the folks being put forward. So that was the mention of the long COVID trial. Now the CHS one, the cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. So there's the recent update from Cefyn Russo has a paper on looking for genetic correlations, and I was involved in that study. I can't remember off the top of my head how things came about, actually, where that came up, but I came in contact with what was going on there, and had the opportunity to fill out details and things and be involved, and so I participated in that study. Now, there was some reports online of it recently of I'd say there's a lot of noise around it from different angles, of some complaints about what the intentions or who's funding it, or how it's been used, or how it's been misrepresented, misinterpreted. There's all that. There's that. We can cover that. But on the cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, it's something I looked into previously, and just to run through some of the origins of how we came to be here. You know, it was 2004 was the first mentioned case reports for study. It was from Australia, and they started with 19 subjects, and it was down to 9 remaining subjects in this group, and they came to the conclusion that their chronic cannabis use was responsible for cyclical vomiting that was brought on. But when you look through the period from 2004 up to 2010 as to what was the evidence of what it's all based on. So the first study in Australia, 2004, with 9 patients. The next year, there's a report of 1 in the UK documented. There's another paper next year in the US based on 1 patient. The next year, 2007, Australia, based on 1 patient. The next year, 2008, in the US, based on 8 patients. Another paper in Australia on 1 patient, 1 from New Zealand, another paper on 1 patient, another paper on 1 patient, and then there's ones on 3 patients, 2 patients, 2 patients, 8 and 4. And that covers the whole introduction of the concept. And they've been referenced now by like hundreds of other studies. So when you look into how it came to be, I don't know, it doesn't appear to be completely clear. There are overlaps with cyclical vomiting syndrome, which can be brought on by different unknowns, and there are often correlations to things like strong smells and that. And some people who have ongoing cyclical vomiting syndrome, they've had that. They may not know exactly what's triggered that. So the trial with Cefyn Russo was looking for polymorphisms, genetic variations that may be connected to an increased risk. Now, it had been going on for some time, the shout out to get folks involved in the trial. I think I mentioned it to a few other people that the opportunity to participate. I'm not sure if anyone had or looked into it further at the time, but it was a pretty small sort of study group that they ended up with. It was like, I forget the figures here, but it was I think like less than 30 or so as the cannabinoid hyperemesis patients, and then it was down to about 12 controls, down to then only 10 of them were actually eligible to compare against. So there was a conclusion that there was some genetic correlations. Actually, of interest was the fact that variations in the CB1 and CB2 were not found in the correlations to an increased risk, but variations in the TRPV1, the TRPV1 receptor, that was connected to some correlations, and that is the mechanism by which some people have said that applying hot pepper or things like this has calmed down the vomiting syndrome they've had. Mm-hmm. The TRPV1 receptor system is now considered to be what they call part of the endocannabinoid dome. So the endocannabinoid system has now been expanded in concept to the endocannabinoid dome, which includes the TRPV1 receptor system, which predates cannabinoid signaling. So the cannabinoid receptor system showed up around 600 million years ago, but the TRPV1 receptor is traced back to about 1 billion years ago. And it's interesting, CBD has direct action with the older receptor network, and other plant compounds do as well. So they found some correlations, but the other, just to mention some of the let's say the drama or controversy around the whole study, I think came up in some of our green room chats around the subject before we dived in and talked more about it, would be that there was a big pushback from some of the cannabis community online to not participate in the study, because they were saying the information was just to be sold off for some company to try and push some products. And this, I believe that half the study had been funded by Ethan Russo and his research side, possibly even him personally funding some, I'm not totally sure on that. But the other half, a company involved which is specializing in analyzing DNA variations to connect them up with what's known in health reports. And then where people are objecting is they're going the extra step to say this might be a suggested profile for you based on your DNA analysis. Now, I don't have, when I got involved in this, I was aware of what was going on there, and it's anonymized DNA printouts. The only difference this company has is they have it correlated with detailed, let's say, a health assessment or a health report of what you say about your background and your various things. And you could get your DNA analysis done through other mechanisms, like those family tree type mechanisms, whatever. If you had the breakdown of the raw data, you could go yourself and figure it out from what's being correlated. So within that breakdown, what that company is offering is there's some interesting things, like to say that, oh, you've got your genetic variant is being flagged here, and it could have contradictory outcomes. It could say one study that your genetic variant was showed to be like, increased prone to, anxiety or something. But here's another study which shows actually your genotype was of a decreased risk of that based on these parameters of how that is. So it's just putting information together, which I think it's really helpful. The information that can be found from it, not to be taken as any conclusive thing, but to look a bit into your background. And actually the one angle of interest I was quite interested to hear across the board. So this company, what I got in return for participating in the study, in addition to contributing my story to say I hadn't had vomiting problems and I could contribute in that, was I got a full breakdown of what's known about my system correlated to what's in, with that. So that's pretty cool. Well, one of the things that's covered is the concerns people have of introducing cannabis into society, higher THC access, as they say, the whole psychosis, schizophrenia, triggering. Outside of that, there has been some genetic variations of the CB1 receptor in some types, which have been shown to have either an increased risk of, let's say, having a potential transient psychotic experience, or it could be deemed as the metabolism of THC or just the CB1 variant responds differently. So anyway, that's covered in this genetic analysis. So, for example, I know that I am not genetically prone based on the information that's known where there has been some genetic correlations. And then the other thing is they do have genetic correlations of certain genotypes which have been correlated with an inability to metabolize THC. And that typically is people who have a very bad experience from edibles. And even when they try a low dose of edibles, they could be a standout in a group. Like if you give it to 10 people, everyone was fine, but there was one person, even with a low dose, they couldn't tolerate it. And they were saying they were still feeling strange the next day. There has been some genetic correlations on the ability to metabolize. So again, having that genetic variant doesn't mean that you're specifically going to have that. But it's like one of your potential epigenetic opportunity outcomes of how you could swing, it seems, Yeah. That's where it's useful information. Mm-hmm. But some objected to the way it was being pitched as, if you've got this type, then you should buy this product with this ratio to this terpene profile. I mean, I would take that as a suggested pairing on the side, but the raw data I found interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And as you say, the more we get, the more we can correlate to get rid of outlying variables and other factors to understand the ubiquity of this across humanity, so that we can start to understand the other variants in different races, people that have gone over different climates, that eat different foods. Because again, the endocannabinoid system, and I suppose the dome now, to a larger extent, will entirely be influenced by the diet, by pollution in the air, all of these different things. I mean, if you look at the study of epigenetics, it's interesting that you say that these people with high doses of edibles, I mean, it's almost as if then, obviously we know the genetic switches is a very crude way of speaking of this. I can hear a few scientist friends of mine screaming in my ear. But effectively then having an event that then triggers within the system a change of sort of levels of sensitivity. And so would correlate to, as you said, with smells and whatever else, that there's then, in my estimation or understanding, there must be some sort of ground zero and some sort of initiation point for this transition. If there are these groups of individuals that are extreme or large, what we call heavy cannabis consumers, extreme cannabis consumers out there on surfboards and shit. But yeah, they are heavy cannabis consumers. Then they're just having this moment. And obviously, I think if we're then seeing the prevalence of it, in my head, I'm looking at correlatory data that obviously doesn't equal causation. There's more weed. There's more people that are having this problem with weed. Is that weed, or is it the way that they're getting that weed? Do you know what I mean?
Oh, so yeah, back to that point. So I never dived onto this side. Now, I published an article just the other day on my LinkedIn, just on the personal, about pesticide synergist called piperonyl butoxide. I think that's how you pronounce it. And I've wrote a whole thing on it, but why it caught my attention was since about 2014, there was a study done and it was shown to inhibit CB1 signaling and inhibit the CB1 receptor. And it's used as a synergist with pesticides. And because it's a synergist, some regulation, various parts of the world, has considered it not an active compound of its own, so not really subject to many maximum residue levels. And then, so it's tested as safe on its own, but it works by how it works is it slows down the insect's liver's ability to process pesticides. So the pesticides that the liver, the pesticides that the insects were able to tolerate, when the synergist was put in, they couldn't tolerate because they couldn't break down the pesticide and they were killed by the toxic reaction. Now, the WHO says that for a 70 kilo adult, 14 milligram of that per day is fine, according to them. And now it's various countries in Europe have taken different actions to reduce or remove it. Health Canada has banned it in medical cannabis, but it's permitted in like Colorado and Oregon. There's some products that are 90% pure in this compound, which is known to inhibit CB1 signaling. And when we had the previous discussions about neem oil and the cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, and I know that everyone thinks the whole the neem compounds have been discussed and looked at, but what was not really plugged in the bigger perspective is the production of neem in different environments, that this pesticide synergist is often present in neem products. And because of different regulation, it doesn't always need listed as an ingredient, or it's been there present in the process of production of the neem. And like we have the concept of a positive entourage effect, where 20 years ago, we were told that these small traces of terpenes could not possibly be having any active effect because they're at far too low doses. They're below their known active levels. But we know when you put them together, this entourage effect, this synergy, positive happens. So the idea of a negative synergy, when we're going to put multiple pesticides together in a cocktail and only test them one at a time and not really test the theory is definitely there for trouble, let's say. And I would say that since that time, actually, there are others that point out since 2004 or since around that turned up, there have been some products that are brought on the market where folks have said, this is of natural origin, drench the plants in this all the way through till the end or whatever it is. And when I had first came across this compound, so there's been in Canada and the States, there's been some patients at home who have grown their own and it's then tested positive for the synergist which blocks CB1, and they've not found it on the label of anything they were using. And again, it's been, maybe a contaminant of neem or something like that. So yeah, that theory of the negative entourage effect of sorts adding up cannot be ruled out in the bigger picture of just health and what's going on,
Yeah, exactly. I think it's twofold in it. There is obviously the genetic component, but then there is obviously the precipitous event. And it's interesting then that we're saying about it affecting regulation of certain cannabinoid receptors, because then it's going to affect the synergy of the cannabinoid compounds themselves and thus change the potential of a transient psychotic or psychosis type event. Because you're not getting the whole compound in the way that it's intended to be protecting of that kind of experience. You know what I mean? So then we're talking about concentration of these things. When you then start to get up to vape pens and things like that, I think then, you've got quite a cocktail of all kinds of shit.
Oh yeah, so this where I came across that compound, that synergist I'm mentioning to you, it was actually a few years ago, early on in the hemp industry, where I came across it, and it was a new farm in Europe that had been checking out whatever, and farmer had sent some samples, and we were doing some further tests, and we discovered on this sample we'd been looking at, discovered this synergist and some amount of some pesticide which we didn't want to see there, and we're surprised to see there. So we said to the farmer, this is not cool, we've found this in the analysis, where does this come from? And the farmer, he was surprised in a way of like I don't know, I didn't use this stuff, has it come from some other drift? And I was like, well, the concentration present, it's been fairly direct by the concentration that's on here, and this is while we're just at a 2 or 4% or whatever CBD biomass you're talking about. If you're going to amplify that up multiple times, it's starting at an unacceptable level. And where we traced it down, what had happened, and this was after some further investigation, was this compound also gets used in storage pesticides. So this is the thing that some farmer who's grown and harvested and given his harvest over to his mate or whatever has went and stored it in the barn. Either the guy's been using a storage pesticide on his wheat, or perhaps something has been going on in the local environment as to why he thought this was normal to go and do this. But, we were checking out all those things in the chain and found that. But, that's just innocently in different products. And there's various foods, especially in the States, where they can have a lot more amount of that in their food supply. Mm-hmm. You throw that into the mix. It's definitely it's not clear, and this is the thing. So, like that study of Ethan Russo's, they found some genetic correlations, and they have these patients where typically that's happened after cannabis, but there are a large section of people with those same sort of symptoms triggered by other things in the cyclical vomit. There's a cyclical vomiting association who have a full rundown breakdown of all the similarities in that as well. So there's definitely something going on, but
exactly. We're seeing that in the larger areas where it's legalized, they're not using the expertise from the hydro industry, the people that have learned about the plant. They're going to big ag and using their techniques and their protocols. And again, the legislator isn't then protecting the people from it because it's information that they don't yet know. So again, that's going to be in food and everything else, as you say. So it would make sense that if people then have this exposure and have this suppression of a CB1 receptor, in the body, that then when they're producing endogenous cannabinoids and whatever, that's going to have a negative health effect anyway, which can affect like immunity and whatever. So then when they're exposed to these things, it's going to compound that effect. So then when they are exposed to cannabis, and the receptor can't then deal with the volume in the way that it should be dealt with. Yeah, you can imagine then there's got to be an alternative way the system works through that. And as I said before, it doesn't go through those gateways. Do you know what I mean? It's a very crude way of describing it.
Worth mentioning there that, as I said, that in the genetic variations, it wasn't correlated with genetic variations in the CB1 receptor, which has been correlated with some of the transient psychotic at-risk types, but that TRPV1 receptor, which is the one that is stimulated by various herbs and things in nature, and the older one, that was the one that was correlated with a variant. And if that's, it goes back a billion years or whatever, we haven't looked at what these synergists, I know that detail about the CB1 signaling in the synergist, but the TRPV1 receptor, if that's the thing that's dysregulated, all these, a negative entourage effect is not out of the question,
Well, yeah, as we started to understand more of everything being so intimately linked within the body, it's the same, I guess, of the global ecology, really. If it's going in somewhere, it's going to come out somewhere else. It's going to be an issue in somewhere. I appreciate you catching me up on that. I feel a bit more informed, and I'm hoping some of the people do at home as well. With us being quite mindful of time, any other points either of you would like to sort of raise, put on the record, anything you think people should be aware of for right now?
No.
That you can put out on the record, we'll put it that way.
All right. Yeah, no. Other than I don't think my bladder's designed for 2 hour long calls.
Mine either, to be honest with you. So, in that case, we'll wrap this up, and obviously you're both dealing with certain things and involved in quite a lot of things. So I do hope to see you both back here at some point soon when information is in the public sphere and we can discuss this further. But I'm grateful for you both taking the time, or as always, putting over my rants, and just helping catch me personally up, and hopefully our listeners with kind of what's been going down and all the misdirection and the smoke and mirrors. So hopefully people, if you are a bit more informed, do check out the links that I'm going to share below for some of the information that we've discussed, and where you can keep up with Hound, and keep an eye on Kyle and what he's up to with the Scottish Hemp Association and Holistic Hemp. So do check them out, guys. Give them some support and love, and thank you very much.
Great.
Cheers.
Thanks for having us.
Been excellent.
I've got to take these off.
I haven't pressed stop yet. Sorry. Here you go. Here's your outtake. Sorry, I just realized buy it. All the usual housekeeping, folks. Like, share, subscribe. Find me on all social media at the Simpa Life. Check us out on patreon.com, where you can help keep the lights on this little project. More increasingly expensive lights, I'll have you know. It's very warm in here because we need such beautiful lighting. So if you want to contribute to that, check us out on patreon.com// the Simpa Life. And yeah, peace, love. See you next week.